Good day, I'm Vincent Saxtetter, and this is the After the Age of Fire channel. This is episode 12, recorded on October 18th, 2025. The topic today is living on our present harvest, or maybe another title would be Less Energy Does Not Mean the Stone Age. Um, just to recap the main idea of this channel is meant to explore the current situation of the human race, more or less what we've been doing for the last 250 years, which has been exponential growth, multiplying our consumption every 22 years. And then the exponential growth will end sometime. And so I'm exploring in this channel what we can say about what's going on right now and about what will happen after the exponential growth ends. And more or less the reason for all of this content is, well, one is just to understand our situation, what the world we're in, and ourselves better. And another reason is to prepare. You could almost say this is a prepping channel. It's not a typical prepping channel. Um, Getting ready, getting your family ready so that your family will be able to adapt and thrive in the new situation as exponential growth ends and we come to whatever comes next. Um, anyway, today is episode 12, and it's the fourth in a sequence. The sequence started with two episodes on the energy that we use, how we use energy. The first episode was everything except transportation, and the second episode was transportation. And then the third episode last week was our harvest, where we get our energy. I'll recap that in a second here. And and then today is, since we now understand how we use our energy and how much energy we use, and we also understand where we're getting our energy and how much energy we get. Now we can talk about the balance sheet. How do things tally up? Do things balance against each other, and how does that balance work? And um, so that's the now we can look at the balance and what it would mean to live on our present harvest, the parts of our present harvest that are likely to continue for centuries, as opposed to the ones that may run out sometime in the next decades. Um, or another way of saying it is, if we had a bit less energy, I don't mean zero energy, but a bit less energy, that doesn't mean the Stone Age. So less energy does not mean that we're going to back to the Stone Age or anything like it. So, and just to remind you, all of what I present is based on lots and lots of data from scientific articles and different uh, organizations that have tallied up all sorts of numbers and lots and lots of. This is not. I'm not making this up, um, and all sorts of backup if you want it. Um, just I'm trying to put it in an understandable format that anybody can grasp and all in one place, so you can put it together and see the whole picture and see what the whole picture tells us about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. Right now, we're in the part of the content that's about where we've been. Uh, in other words, the exponential growth phase and where all our energy comes from and where it goes and so on. And then we'll work into work towards the future. But that'll be months from now. Um, so our harvest, just to recap the last session, the last episode, our harvest is, you can break it down into 20,000 calories plus 46,000 calories. So there's 46,000 calories of coal, oil, and gas that we consume per person per day. Each person, this is averaging across the whole world. Of course, some people get a lot more of that, and some people get a lot less. but the average worldwide is 46,000 calories per person per day of coal, oil, and gas. And then there's another 20,000. Um, that 20,000, 14,000 of it comes from food, fodder, and lumber, things that we grow and then we eat or we feed to our livestock or we turn into paper products and so on. There's also another 1,000 calories there of biofuel and biomass. So biofuel is things that you put in your gas tank. And biomass is essentially wood chippings that you put in electrical power plants. So that's 15,000 of things that we grow. Um, and then there's another 4,800 calories, which I'll round to 5,000, uh, of non-plant-based energy that per person per day. That's hydroelectric, in other words, dams, geothermal, hot places far underground, nuclear energy, wind energy, and solar energy. As I've emphasized in previous episodes, compared to our total energy consumption, which is close to 60,000 calories, our non-plant-based, what we call renewables, are negligible. They're 1/10. So uh, we don't need to waste. Actually, I'm going to spend some time examining whether we can get more energy from nuclear, wind, and solar. And a few episodes from now, I'll go through those in some detail. But that's just to put the nails in the coffin. You don't need to waste that much time thinking about them. At least right now, maybe we will increase them. I think we will some, but as of now, if you want to think about where our energy is coming from and where it's going, you really don't need to worry about renewables. What you need to think about is the two major sources are, first of all, coal, oil, and gas with its 46,000 calories, and then food, fodder, and lumber, everything that we grow for another 15,000, and then the renewables are icing on the cake. That's another 5,000. So if you take everything except for coal, oil, and gas, all of our energy supply adds up to 20,000 calories. Less than a third of our total energy consumption. More than 2/3 of it comes from coal, oil, and gas. So now the very next content, well, in this in this in this series will be about coal, oil, and gas, and about now about whether we can increase it and how much we're likely to get and how long that will last for us. Now, I just want to explain for a second that I won't be discussing carbon dioxide, global warming, and the rest anytime soon. I may get around to it sooner or later, but here I'm just interested. This whole channel is about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, and what we're actually doing, which is burning things. Okay, that's the bottom line. We burn things. We burn a lot. Okay, that's why it's called After the Age of Fire channel. Um, so, and we're on this exponential growth path where we multiply the amount that we burn roughly every 22 years. We double it every 22 years, and all our talk about global warming or about saving the planet and all the rest seems to have no impact on that. So I'm just not going to bother talking about the talk about whether we're ruining our planet. Okay, we seem to be, regardless of what we think, what some of us think we are doing, we're just going ahead and we're burning more and more, and we don't seem to be slowing that down in any reasonable way. I mean, in any visible way. Um, so so given so I'm just going to put that to the side and say what else might come in and affect how much we burn. because just, I mean, our, our ideas about global warming or about saving the planet are one thing, but there may be other things that will influence how much coal, oil, and gas we get out of the ground, and what and how long and so on. Okay. Well, I think my first comment. So I'm just telling you that was just to say what I'm not going to talk about. What I am going to talk about, and just briefly, will be that someday we won't be able to multiply our coal, oil, and gas every 22 years or whatever, and someday it will be harder and harder to obtain them. Um, in the past, at times, it's been very hard to obtain these things. We had to send lots of people underground, working under dangerous conditions to get coal, and we didn't know much about oil and gas yet. Um, and things may go back to something where you have to have more work and more danger in order to get these things, and then we'll have to make choices about uh, how much how much of them we want at that price, the price of human lives, and so on. Um, in any case, I don't think we're likely to completely run out, just as after thousands of years we still haven't run out of gold and diamonds. There will still be some, but the amount on offer will decrease, and and it'll be harder to get and more expensive. So for coal, oil, and gas, and the story will be perhaps a little bit different for coal than for oil and for gas, but in any case, sooner or later, the amount on offer will be will decrease, and it will be more expensive, and we'll need to decide what to do about that. Um, so I'm saying even if we don't break ourselves and stop ourselves from destroying the planet, and even if somehow miraculously, despite our choice to keep burning more and more, the planet we continue to stay alive, and some species around us continue to stay alive. Even in that case, there will sooner or later come a day when there will be less on offer, and sooner or later in the next content, I'm going to argue that actually the amount on offer will eventually be less than what we're consuming today. We'll have less coal, oil, and gas available than we have today. Um, so I suspect that um, so um, so then what I am going to do with the rest of this episode is explore scenarios where there just isn't as much coal, oil, and gas, and therefore maybe we have some difficulty maintaining the same amount of energy consumption and supply as we have now. As I remind you, 60,000 calories now, 15,000 roughly for food, fodder, and lumber, and the rest to be used by our machines, mostly in our heating. Um, so what? So now, and then next content after the coal, oil, and gas, I'll be talking about renewables, and I suspect that we will increase our renewables a bit, um, uh, but we'll never get as much energy from our renewables as we are today from coal, oil, and gas. So the renewables will not make up the difference, and um, and then I'll also discuss at some length about whether we're able to get more from our harvests, from our cropland and stuff, whether we could get more calories from our cropland. And again, we may be able to increase our harvest from the cropland, but it won't make up the difference of what we're going to lose when the amount of coal, oil, and gas on offer decreases. So, um, so here I want to discuss. I want to just leave out the details of for the moment. I'll come back to them about how much we're likely to be able to get from the biosphere and uh, from renewables. And I just want to talk about an extreme case. Okay, the extreme case I want to sketch is one where um, where we just completely lose our coal, oil, and gas. Okay, maybe a century or two from now. As I said, I don't think this will ever be completely true. We'll always have some. Okay, but just for the sake of discussion, let's discuss the scenario where we completely lose coal, oil, and gas. There's just none left. Okay, this will never happen. But for discussion, let's talk about it. And where we don't increase our other sources of energy, our renewables and our crops and so on. So in that case, our total energy available to us would be about 20,000 calories. Now, I think maybe I would guess maybe we should discuss instead a scenario where we could also discuss a little more optimistic scenario where we increase our renewables. Maybe we're getting 15,000 calories per person per day from our renewables. Maybe we maintain our harvest of 15,000 calories and we have no coal, oil, and gas. This is what some people would call green energy solution. Okay, but in that case, between renewables and increased renewables and our harvest, we would have 30,000 calories compared to today's 60,000 calories. Either way, we have 15,000 calories of harvest, and then we have either today's 5,000 of renewables, or maybe we increase it to 15,000. Who knows? But let's just discuss this scenario where our consumption of coal, oil, and gas disappears, and therefore our total energy use divides by 2 or 3. Okay, and what could we do? What would life be like then? Okay, that's the whole point of this episode: is what would life be like with less energy? Not no energy, less energy. At least 20,000 calories, maybe 30. Well, let's say 20,000 calories. So 15,000 calories from the biosphere and 5,000 from renewables. What would life be like then? Okay. Well, we have two options. I'll discuss two extremes of the options. One is we continue to use our harvest exactly the way that we're using now, which means we feed 9,000 calories. Well, not we have 9,000 calories that some of it is food that we just throw away, but most of it is fodder for our animals, and we get back from our animals 800 calories. And then the rest we eat or we use as wood products. We can't really do without the wood products because we build things from wood, and concrete and brick and so on are also expensive because they require fires to create concrete and brick and so on. So either way, you have to spend energy. Either you just use the energy embodied in the wood to make wood structures, or else you use that and you burn the wood to make your concrete or your brick. Okay. Anyway, there's no point. So roughly 5,000 calories would go for our wood products and for our food. Another 9,000 calories, a portion of that would be thrown away as it is now, and the rest would go to our animals, and we'd get about a tenth of that back. Another 1,000 calories for biofuel and biomass. Okay, and that would leave 6,000 calories, or no, the 1,000 calories of biofuel and biomass, and another 5,000 calories for renewables. We'd have 6,000 calories then to use instead of the current supply of 46,000 calories. Okay, so divide our current energy consumption by almost 10. Okay. Or maybe we decide maybe we want a little more electricity in our houses and a little more of something to burn to move us around and than that. So maybe we decide that we want uh, to get to use as much of the biospheres, as much of the crops as we can for energy instead of for food and wood. Okay, so in that case, well, that means we go vegetarian. The whole world goes vegetarian, or almost the whole world, um, and we stop wasting our food. We just consider it a sin to throw away food. We do everything required to make sure it ends in somebody's mouth. Um, and then that means we have 5,000 calories for food and for lumber, and then we're not feeding our livestock. We have no more livestock. All of the remaining calories can be burned. Um, so we have 5,000 from renewables and roughly 10,000 from our crops to be burned. So we have 15,000 calories left. So that would mean dividing our current average energy consumption by 3. Our current average energy consumption is 46,000 plus food, fodder, and wood. If we were to reduce our food, fodder, and wood by not keeping animals anymore and by not wasting food, then we could have 15,000 calories plus what remains of the food, fodder, and wood. So this is a scenario where we're all vegetarian and where we have 15,000 calories of energy for the usual uses. Okay. Or another scenario that I mentioned earlier is where we continue to have all our livestock and we continue to waste food as we do today, but we build 10,000 more calories of renewables. We multiply the numbers of windmills and nuclear power plants and solar panels until we're getting 15,000 calories of harvest. Either way, either we're vegetarian and we have 15,000 calories of energy, or the other option is we just build more renewables and we have 15,000 calories. So that's what I want to discuss for the remainder, is what would it be like to live on 15,000 calories of energy per person per day, averaged across the world, plus food and lumber. And and of course, maybe vegetarian, maybe everyone's vegetarian, or if we built some more renewables, then maybe we're not vegetarian. So what is it like to live on 15,000 calories a day instead of 46,000 calories per day? Well, the main thing I want to say, the main point of this episode, is that it wouldn't be the end of the world. Not nearly, not the Stone Age, nothing like it. Okay. Look, fact is, half of the world, 4.35 billion people, live right now on an average of 15,000 calories per person per day plus food, fodder, and wood. That's all of Africa and all of Asia except for China, South Korea, Japan, and Australia. If you take all of that immense land area and more than half of the world's population that's in that area, and you average their energy consumption, it's 15,000 calories per person per day. And they're not in the Stone Age, I can tell you. Okay. Africa's not in the Stone Age. It's not even, doesn't even belong to a century ago, and Asia is not in the Stone Age. In fact, it doesn't. They're all high tech. Everyone has cell phones. Okay. The technologies and all the modern technologies and the best practices, all the ideas of how to study, how to learn, how to organize societies, banks, economies, all of these have diffused around the world, and every single country has some access and probably a lot of access to many of these things. There are modern doctors, modern hospitals, um, there's research, scientific research all around the world, including in this 4.5 billion people who live on 15,000 calories average per person per day. Okay, and some of these countries live on less. For instance, Africa, taken as a whole from from the southern tip to the northern Mediterranean coast, lives on an average of 10,000 calories per person per day. And then if you take the portion of Africa, you leave out Algeria, Egypt, and one more on the northern on the Mediterranean. You leave out South Africa, that leaves 1.1 billion people, and they live on a little more than 4,000 calories per person per day, and they have internet and many other things. Of course, it's a little harder sometimes to get these things. You struggle more to get your child into university, and medical care is uneven, and so on. But this is not the Stone Age. It's not even a century ago. In fact, the world as a whole is not really having the famines that were common until 50 or 100 years ago. And there is some famine in small areas and some food insecurity, but it's nothing like it was. Um, so it's not living on less is living on 15,000. You could still have a perfectly functional modern society that way. In fact, we did. I'll come to that in a minute. The rich countries did. So maybe this would be the end of the world for the rich half of the world. There's another 3.5 billion people in the Americas, North and South America, Central America, and Europe, and China, South Korea, Japan, and Australia. You take those together, and they, in order to get to 15,000 calories per day, would have to divide their total energy consumption by 6. And the United States, to get to that level, would divide their energy consumption by 14. So for them, might seem like the apocalypse, or maybe not exactly the apocalypse, but it would be very, very painful and something that they would hate. But it doesn't mean that it's going back to some uneducated tribal hellscape. In fact, we can be sure of that because every single one of the countries in the world did live on 15,000 calories per person per day or less until, so the first countries to get rich were the UK, United States, Germany, France, and I think Japan came a little later. And that would have been in the 1800s, I think the last half of the 1800s. I'm not sure of the exact timing when they went over 15,000 calories per person per day, but up through 1850, I don't think I doubt that there's any country that was consuming on average that amount. I think it was in the second half of the 1800s, but I'm not quite sure of the timing. In general, when you cross that, the country crosses that threshold when it's industrializing, when it's learning how to produce large amounts of stuff, and it's sometime after that threshold, or perhaps it's around the time of that threshold when we start talking about having a car for every family, or having large houses in the suburbs, or huge malls in every city. Used to be that there were some huge malls, but they were in the capital cities and things like that. or long distance vacations far from home. Those things can't come afterwards, but already you're well. You can have a great educations for and factories and so on, and still not be at 15,000. Um, so let's talk about other countries besides those richest, the ones that got rich earliest. Um, well, Spain and Italy only crossed the threshold in the 1950s after World War II. Um, then in the 60s, there came Mexico and Thailand exceeded 15,000 calories. In the 70s, there's Brazil and South Korea both crossed the threshold around 1973. Um, uh, and then in the 80s, 1983, there was Egypt. In 1987, China. So they were both past the threshold. In the 2000s, Central America and Indonesia. And then in the 2010s, there was Vietnam and India. Those are just some. I'm sure I'm not listing all the several hundred countries in the world. Okay, but my point is that for most of the world, um, almost all countries in the world, the threshold was crossed in living memory. People can you talk to somebody who's old enough, and they can tell you what life was like before, and the and evidently, they may say they may be very happy and proud of their country that now they have 5 times more of everything than they did when they were a child. Okay, but the fact is that clearly they had good lives. Excuse me. And they had educations, they had medical care, they were able to travel. Some of them did travel worldwide long before that the country reached 15,000 calories per person per day. Um, so if you talk to people in Spain and Italy, you'll be talking to people who are in retirement. Um, you talk to people in Brazil and South Korea, you'll be talking to people who are middle-aged and they'll remember well. Um, if you talk to people in China or Egypt, you'll be talking to people in their 40s, and people in Vietnam or India or Central America. People who are 20 or 30 may remember. In fact, they'll barely be out of that scenario of 15,000. So clearly, these countries did not move from the Stone Age to modern life in the 50s or in the 70s or 2010. They had cultures, they had many of the modern conveniences and so on, and they could do things. Okay, they could even fight wars with modern weapons and sometimes win them. Uh, but but it wasn't. There was life. So when we imagine a world with a bit less energy, it doesn't mean that we're. That's the whole point. Is it's not the end of the world. Now, what about the rich countries that went through this threshold before living memory? So in the 1800s, and there's the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, France, and I think maybe Japan is in this category, but I'm not quite sure when Japan exceeded that energy threshold. Um, well, people in these countries, well, they can. I think the easiest. There are several things you can do. One thing is you can just go and examine. You can visit, or you can watch videos about, or or whatever about what life is like in the other half of the world. Okay. Um, that's one option, and you can notice that these people have some well-educated doctors and research institutes and sometimes even democracies, and they manufacture things and so on. They aren't riding with pieces of clay on the walls of their caves and so on. They aren't drinking from their sewers and so on. There are a few who do, very unfortunate people, but not too many. Um, Another thing you could do is you could look at your own country's records. I'm from the United States, and so if there are pictures from the 1800s that I can see. I can look at pictures of my own city, in my own neighborhood even, that I grew up in, or other cities, and I can see what people looked like, what houses looked like, how people got around, things like that. I can also get out a map of what my city looked like when say in 1850, or I can see still in my city's layout today reflections of what that map was in 1850, and I'll notice that the city was a lot smaller, and that if I think about the placement of different neighborhoods and different businesses, if I think about, oh, this was once a rich person's neighborhood, oh, this was a business center, this was the town center, and they had the biggest shopping mall right there. This was the canal that ran through the city, um, and so on. I can think about why things were placed where they were and how people got through their daily lives, how they got to work. Most of them got there on foot. I could where they bought their groceries. So on. Also, I can just dig up some novels written in the 1800s and see what they tell me about what life was like then. I can think about budgets, and there are records of budgets. The typical family budget of a working class person in the United States um, was they might have spent 50% or more, half or more of their budget on food. Many of them rented instead of owning houses, but you can expect probably on 15,000 calories per person per day, food might be a larger fraction of your budget. You can think about what the temperatures were like indoors during the winter. So you might remember or find out that at night people would take foot warmers to bed with them, and sometimes those foot warmers actually had live fires in them. Perhaps when they woke up, the basin of water next to the bed might be frozen over, so you need good blankets. Maybe the house was smaller, maybe quite a bit smaller, maybe there was less in the house, maybe less of a yard. Okay, but this is the mid 1800s or late 1800s, and clearly very successful countries, already dominating the world, already very well organized, high tech, affluent, educated, many of them democratic, full of people just bubbling over with innovation and ideas that shook the world and continue to shake the world, all at a time when people were living on much less energy than than we have now. So in summary, 15,000 calories per person per day, which is what we would be living on if we lost our supply of coal, oil, and gas, and our renewables didn't increase much. That plus food, fodder, and lumber, that would allow a recognizable modern life with high-tech everything. The internet, cell phones, every development of modern science, modern educations, modern organizational techniques, democracies, if we are willing to fight for them, and so on. The bigger question really, I think, is not whether it's the end of the world. No, it's not the end of the world. It would not be the end of the world to do with a bit less energy. It would not be the end of modern society to do with a bit less energy. Um, the bigger question is the convulsions that we would go through on the way there. You know, in some sense, we just don't know how to do without anymore. And so, you know, when you begin to be forced to do without something that you think you can't do without, typically you personally are rather crazy and your behavior is rather crazy for a while. It's called detox. And um, so, and for a country like the United States that has 210,000 calories, and I mean, I'm not a socialist, or I'm not. I keep talking about averages. It doesn't mean that I'm a big believer that everyone should have absolutely equal amounts of everything, and that we should do whatever is required to spread it out evenly. Um, I do think things could be a bit more even than they are now, but that's neither here nor there. But the fact is, uneven or even, if the world average energy consumption went down to 15,000 calories per day, the United States would have a hard time maintaining its current consumption, 210,000 calories per day. If the United States maintained its current consumption while the whole world as an average went down to 15,000, that would mean uh, that would mean the rest of the world would go back to, I don't know, something more like 5,000 calories per person per day. So something like in the poorest countries of Africa. So in the United States would have to do a lot of negotiating and forcing things around to be able to force the rest of the world down while maintaining its status quo. Um, so I doubt it would work out that way. I think the United States would lose some, and the other countries would maintain a little bit higher consumption, one way or another. Um, the other thing, of course, the even bigger question is bigger than doing with less, or the convulsions we would go through on the way there, is how are we ever going to cope with no longer multiplying our consumption every 22 years? Because our whole idea of our personal validity, our validity as groups, as families, as cultures, as countries, is all now measured in terms of growth. So overall, I finally came to the main points. One is one I just went over again and again, which is living without coal, oil, and gas, or living with a lot less of it, would not be the end of the world. It would not even be abandoning our current level of technological prowess and so on. But then there are the convulsions that we would go through as the richer countries would find themselves having to live with less, and then the even worse convulsions that the whole world would go through as we would somehow abandon or be forced to abandon our idea of growth and our idea of validation based on that growth. So that's it for this episode. In the next episode, I'll be discussing coal, oil, and gas. I'll start that discussion. It's going to be a sequence. It'll start with oil, then gas, then coal. Um, uh, and then after that will come our harvest from the world's crops and forests and so on. But right now I'm just trying to frame things. This was to frame things. I'm hinting at where we're going, or maybe more than hinting. By the time we're through our discussion of coal, oil, and gas, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Coal, oil, and gas. After that, it will be renewables, and then will come our crops and forests. Okay. After we're done with all those, the end result will be that it looks to me, and as far as and I'll have taken you through the details, I don't see how we can maintain in the long term our total consumption right now of 46,000 plus 15,000. And probably half or a third of that is what we'll arrive at sooner or later. And I just wanted to frame things at this point saying, well, maybe it's not the end of the world. And if that's where we're going to arrive at sooner or later, then we'll finally come to the question of where are we now along the ride into the future, and then how do you prepare for what is coming next? Okay, thank you for listening and watching, and keep coming back. See you next week. Yeah.